Next up on the list, we've got the evolved or adult form of Gore Magala. We have Shigaru Magala. And Shigaru's considered an elder dragon, I believe. I think that always caused some contention amongst the community. Yeah. This is a late game monster from Monster Hunter 4 4U. And when Gore Magala sort of evolves into its adult form, it becomes this sort of brightly colored, kind of regal looking elder dragon. And you fight it on top of a mountain in sort of an enclosed area. Shigaru is cool. I don't think it's necessarily as iconic as Gore, but the two sort of go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. So I would put Shigaru on high B tier. I think I'm going to put it below Teostra. Overall, its design is neat. It's a very sort of contrasting style and look. But I think Gore Magala, as this sort of mysterious, dark entity that you're fighting against in the quote-unquote story of Monster Hunter 4, sort of sits higher up on the list. So, to me, Shigaru sits at around upper B tier on the list of monsters from design and fight. Its fight's interesting, decently challenging. We'll put it there for now. Next up, we have another pretty well-known elder dragon from Monster Hunter 4 and 4U. My memory in the older games is a little bit scattered, but we have Dalamadur. Dalamadur is a pretty neat elder dragon. It is an endgame monster from 4, according to the wiki, and it's encountered on a unique map called the Spear Tip Crag. And Dalamadur is a giant snake dragon. It is massive when you fight it, sort of along the size and scale of things like the Morans. But Dalamadur sort of starts on this big mountain peak and it sort of coils around it. Throughout the fight, you're doing damage by attacking this thing's body, running up and trying to get shots on its head and avoid all these different projectiles that it launches. Overall, it's a pretty unique fight and a pretty unique design. I remember seeing the initial footage of this since I believe you fight it in Monster Hunter 4, and we didn't see it till Monster Hunter 4U. It's one of the higher rank bosses, I think. But overall, the idea of a giant snake dragon is pretty interesting, and as a result, I'm going to put Dalamadur up on A rank. A tier, I'm going to put it below Kushala. Again, my opinion on Kushala might be a bit more controversial than most, but I don't think anyone's going to disagree that Dalamadur is a really cool design. Whether or not you like the whole semi-siege fight and having, run on its body, that's up for debate, but overall, I rate it pretty highly. I would love to see them bring back Dalamadur in current generations. I think they could do a lot with that particular monster in its fight. Alright. Moving right along. Next up, we have a subspecies for Dalamadur. This is Shah Dalamadur. This one has a different color scheme and a slightly different moveset, but more or less it's the same fight. I remember fighting Shah Dalamadur in 4U, and it's still challenging and it's still a pretty epic fight, but again, it doesn't do a whole lot differently. So I'm going to put Shah Dalamadur down here with Hallowed Gen, the bottom of C tier. I do like its design, and I think its color patterning keeps it from getting knocked down to D tier, but overall, again, not a whole lot different to that fight. Next up, we are still moving through Elder Dragons. In fact, it's nothing but Elder Dragons, so we get to a break here. Next up, we've got Gogmazios, and Gogmazios is the endgame boss of for you. Oh, let me check the wiki because I haven't fought this monster in forever. Yeah, alright. Gog is one of the endgame targets in 4U. And this particular Elder Dragon is somewhat unique in design compared to the others. It's got a skeleton sort of like Gore Magala, but it's much larger. It's a gigantic Elder Dragon. But the wings for Gog are usually sort of tucked back and concealed, and it'll sort of smack you around with them. But it does go airborne at some point. This thing's as big as a passenger jet, and eventually it'll fly. But its design is sort of centered around this idea of this tar-like oil substance on its body. So when you fight it in the enclosed siege arena you fight Gog in, its body drips off these pools of oil that sort of create hazards all over the place, and it can sort of ignite the oil using this beam that it shoots out of its mouth. It's a pretty unique fight, and the monster itself has a pretty imposing and unique design. Sort of as a complement to the fight, as you go about the sea, it's just a semi-siege type encounter. You'll notice that it's got a Dragonator stuck to its back. And the whole idea is that this thing, I think it eats gunpowder, and at one point it sacked a fortress and it got a Dragonator lodged in its back. So at some point you can do damage and then knock that off and then use it against it in the fight itself. But overall, in addition to being decently difficult, I think Gog Mazios has a pretty unique style and design and fight to it. So I'm going to rate this one pretty highly. I do think it's a cool monster, and it would probably hold up pretty well in the current gen. So I do think I like it better than Morales. I'm going to put Gog Mazios ahead of a Contour here on A tier. It's a pretty solid creature. If we continue through the list here, I think I'm going to break the recording after we get through these Elder Dragons, and we'll start here next time. My voice is starting to go after doing nothing but talking for almost 2.5 hours. We'll go ahead and get through the next couple. Next up, we have another Elder Dragon that debuted in Monster Hunter Generations. We have Nakarkos. Nakarkos is a pretty unique Elder Dragon, sort of like Yamatsugami in that it doesn't fall into the whole winged dragon or even snake dragon archetypes that some of the other ones do. Nakarkos, when you fight it, it looks like two big skeleton dragon heads and a big shell that are sort of roaming around this field of bones that it creates as its lair. You do enough damage to the fight, and you find out that the shell of the dragons is literally just a shell, and the monster itself is this big squid-like creature. Almost looks like a big blue cuttlefish that uses the shell as its sort of shelter, and then its tentacles are the dragon heads. And basically what Nakarkos does is it takes the bones of monsters that it either accumulates or kills, and it uses the bones as armor for its limbs. And so the whole fight is fighting its limbs and its body while it tries to squash you or shoot you with its different projectile attacks. Overall, Nakarkos is pretty unique among the Elder Dragons. I do like it a lot. As a result, I'm going to put Nakarkos up here next to Gog to upper A tier. The fight itself was decently challenging. I think from a design perspective, it's pretty neat. Until you actually do the fight and encounter the different phases. It's kind of a surprise, and I do like that. So we'll put Nakarkos up here. Moving along the Elder Dragon list here. Another one. This one is the flagship for Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. We have Valstrax. Valstrax, from what I remember, it's been a little bit, but this one is essentially the cover monster for Generations Ultimate. And The other day I was talking with some hunting buddies of mine about monsters we'd like to see coming up in future games that have not shown up in the current generations, and one of the ones that I said needs to come back is Valstrax. Basically, it's this sort of avian-looking dragon. It has the same skeleton as Gormagala with the 4 legs and 2 wings sort of style. But the unique mechanic to Valstrax is that it has these wings that function like jet engines. It stores up, I believe, it's dragon energy and uses it as propulsion. So this thing you're fighting is able traveling at hypersonic speeds and flying all around the map. It's a pretty dynamic fight and very unique for Monster Hunter. Between the pace of the fight and its overall unique style, I would rate Valstrax pretty highly on the list. I'm going to put it near the upper part of A tier. I'm going to put it under Amatsu. I think it definitely got people's attentions in the promo materials for the game because no one had really seen anything quite like it. Because Monster Hunter is not necessarily grounded in realism, the whole idea of a jet-powered dragon was pretty unique, and the fight itself was fun, so I put Valstrax up here pretty high. It's one I'd like to see come back in later games. Maybe we'll see it in Rise. Next up in the list of Elder Dragons, we've got Zora Magdaros, sort of the story mode, lower tier antagonist, if you will, from World. Zora Magdaros is sort of like a more up-to-date Lao Shan. It's a big volcano dragon. It sort of lumbers along a siege path, and kind of like Lao and Jin, you get on it and you do damage to its different parts to weaken it, and then at the end you fight it at the barrier to the main area of the siege. And overall, the fight's okay. I like it in concept a lot more than in execution. Design-wise, this sort of big lumbering kaiju type monster, it's a big moving volcano, is pretty neat. The fight itself, I feel, could have been streamlined a bit more. You run through it with multiple people, it's not too bad, but it's a bit of a slog to do by yourself. So I'd put Zora Magdaros in the upper part of C tier. I think its design carries a little bit further. I'm not the biggest fan of its fight, but it's okay. I don't think it's unpleasant or annoying. It just could be done better. So we'll put Zora up here after Great Gyros. Next up on the list, we've got the flagship monster of Monster Hunter World, the one and only Nergigante. Nerg definitely caught people's eye when the initial promo stuff for Monster Hunter World was coming out. The idea of this big, sort of demonic looking, spiky elder dragon was a bit more unique. And they did a good job of sort of hyping up the monster throughout the promo stuff, and then in-game it functions sort of like your main story antagonist until you sort of learn more about what's going on and why it's there. Design-wise, I think Nergigante is great. It's one of my favorite of the recent Elder Dragons to come out. So as a result, I would put Nergigante up here on S tier, but it's going to be a bit lower compared to some of the other ones. I think it does a good job of being an icon and selling Monster Hunter World as its flagship. So I'm going to put it down here below the unofficial mascot for current generation Dodogama. I like Nerg. It's a pretty neat monster, and I'd be interested to see it in later games as well. Next up, we have the variant for Nerg. Let me double check and make sure it's a variant. The Elder Dragons don't necessarily have subspecies a lot of the time. Some do, but Ruiner Nergigante is a variant. It's basically a regular Nergigante that evolved a bit further. It functions very similarly, but it's stronger and faster with some different moves, and has these white crystal spikes that grow in addition to the regular ones. And Ruiner is decently challenging. It's not a pushover, especially on Master Rank. Overall, I feel like Ruiner is a pretty decent entry, and while it's not super different from the regular version, I think it holds its own fairly well. So I'm going to put Ruiner Nurg on B tier. Let's put you ahead of Silverlos. I've encountered Ruiner in the story, but I haven't unlocked the Hunter rank to farm it up on Master rank yet, but I'm pretty close. So we'll put Ruiner here.